Alright. Hi scholars, this lecture is titled Applied Research and Conducting Single-Case Designs Based on Research Questions. Content acknowledgements to Drs. Rob Horner and Karen Douglas. There are 4 objectives to this presentation. 1. Explain historical theories that influence single-case research. 2. Describe the components of applied research. 3. Identify 4 elements of single-case research questions. And 4. Discuss the quality indicators of single-case research. Let's begin by investigating the historical theories that influence single-case research. First, Südmann's avoidance procedure is acknowledged because interventions that seek to change behavior rely on free operant avoidance, in which an individual learns to avoid an aversive stimulus by remembering to produce the response without any other stimulus by a certain amount of time. Skinner, through his work in behaviorism, contributed key concepts used in single-case research. Operant conditioning. According to behaviorist principles, positive means adding something, while negative means taking something away. Reinforcement is any event that strengthens or increases the behavior it follows. There are 2 kinds of reinforcers. Positive reinforcers are favorable events or outcomes that are presented after the behavior. In situations that reflect positive reinforcement, a response or behavior is strengthened by the addition of something, such as praise or a direct reward. Negative reinforcers involve the removal of an unfavorable event or outcome after the display of the behavior. In these situations, a response is strengthened by the removal of something considered unpleasant. Examples: before heading out for a day at the beach, you slather on sunscreen in order to avoid getting sunburned. On Monday morning, you leave the house early in order to avoid getting stuck in traffic and being late for class. In both cases of reinforcement, the behavior increases. Punishment, on the other hand, is the presentation of an adverse event or outcome that causes a decrease in the behavior it follows. There are 2 kinds of punishment. Positive punishment, sometimes referred to as punishment by application, involves the presentation of an unfavorable event or outcome in order to weaken the response it follows. Because you're late to work one morning, you rush out the door with your coffee cup in hand. As a result of moving quickly, you drop and spill your coffee, potentially burning yourself. Negative punishment, also known as punishment by removal, occurs when a favorable event or outcome is removed after a behavior occurs. In both of these cases of punishment, the behavior decreases. Examples of negative punishment. After getting in a fight with his sister over who gets to play with a new toy, the mother simply takes the toy away. A teenage girl stays out for an hour past her curfew, so her parents ground her for a week. A 3rd grade boy yells at another student during class, so his teacher takes away good behavior tokens that could otherwise be redeemed for prizes. Next, the work of Bear, Wolf, and Risley defined core dimensions of applied behavior analysis, among which include the need to ensure that researchers, interventionists, and behaviorists seek only to make socially valid and significant changes in behavior. Essentially, they outline ways to measure the social importance of an intervention's goals, procedures, and outcomes. Finally, Bandura's social learning theory recognizes the ways that people learn. First, he asserts that people can learn through observation. This is referred to as observational learning. Next, he adds that mental states are important to learning. Finally, he acknowledges that learning does not necessarily lead to a change in behavior. Indeed, Südmann, Skinner, Bandura, Bear, Wolf, and Risley are widely acknowledged for their contributions to the field of applied behavior analysis. However, today we can also recognize that many male, female, and non-binary scholars of color were prevented from making contributions to the field or made contributions that were rendered invisible. Applied behavior analysis refers to the science in which procedures derived from the principles of behavior are systematically applied to improve socially significant behavior to a meaningful degree and to demonstrate experimentally that the procedures employed were responsible for the improvement in behavior. If the goal of applied behavior analysis is to produce socially significant changes in behavior, then the onus is on us as scholars and practitioners to de-center whiteness and use practices that promote equity. Let's shift our focus to describe the components of applied research. Applied means that behavior is chosen as the focus for an intervention study because of its importance to society or participants, rather than its importance to theory. In addition, behavior is chosen in need of improvement because it's measurable and we can show that it was the participants' behavior that changed. Moreover, we use an analytic approach where an experimental control is demonstrated. This is documented in single-case research through a functional relation, which is 3 demonstrations of an effect at 3 different points in time. It's technological, meaning the procedures are described in enough detail to allow replication. Also, we align to principles of applied behavior analysis to ensure the effectiveness of interventions. That is, we ensure that improvements or changes in behavior that we are after have practical value. Consider here that an intervention focused on increasing a student's compliance with demands made by a teacher can run counter to the conceptual and historical foundation of ABA, particularly when the expectation for compliance occurs in a classroom setting that marginalizes, silences, and dehumanizes through racist, ableist, classist, and heteronormative practices and beliefs. Finally, the inductive aspect of single-subject research. We can promote generality in several ways. One way is to ensure that changes in behavior occur across conditions and settings. In what ways do the goals of science intersect with the goals of education and treatment in applied settings? Is it possible to incorporate scientific methodology into the daily routine of the classroom environment? According to David Gast, second author of the course text, and his colleague Paul Joseph Weimer-Tawney, the task may require extra effort, but the data should provide sufficient reinforcement to maintain these teaching and research behaviors. What are some similarities between researchers and teachers/clinicians? Both identify and analyze problems. Both generate creative solutions to those problems. Both implement interventions or procedures with technical adequacy in a systematic fashion. Both collect and report on data to document the effects of an intervention. Both single-case researchers and teachers/clinicians use data to inform their decision-making. They act on data. Let's shift now to Objective 3. Identify 4 elements of single-case research questions. The first element is to name the dependent variable, the valued outcome or focus of the study. The second element is to describe the independent variable. This is the variable that is actively manipulated by the researcher and is assumed to be causally linked to the change in the dependent variable. The third element is to describe the functional relation or causal relationship. This includes documenting the control of change in dependent variable via manipulation of the independent variable. Finally, this includes stating the predicted change in pattern, level, trend, and variability. Here's an example research question that includes the four components: independent variable, dependent variable, functional relation, and expected pattern. Is there a functional relation between instruction to build reading fluency and increased level of scores on reading comprehension assessments? Here's another example. Does functional communication training reduce problem behavior? Can be written as, is there a functional relation between functional communication training and reduction in the level of problem behavior for typical elementary school students? Example 3. The question is time delay prompting or least to most prompting more effective in teaching self-help skills for young children with severe intellectual disability? This is rewritten as, is there a functional relation between the use of time delay prompting versus least to most prompting on the rate of skill acquisition, slope, by young children with severe intellectual disability? Here are two non-examples. The study will provide a systematic analysis of the reduction in stuttering by adolescents. Self-delivered consequences are a core element of any analysis of self-determination and will be the focus of this research investigation. Try to formulate a question for an investigation that seeks to document a functional relation when the independent variable is walking in water, the dependent variable is gait for children with gait imbalance, and the expected level is improvement in gait. Does your example read something like, is there a functional relation between water walking training and level of scores on the gait precision index under typical conditions? In single case research, the kinds of questions that we write align with the objective of examining the effects of introducing or manipulating an independent variable on change in one or more dependent variables. The effects of alternating between two or more interventions on change in a dependent variable, or the effects of adding or removing a component of a multi-component intervention on change in a dependent variable. The final segment of this presentation overviews quality indicators of single case research. Several professional organizations have contributed to the development of quality indicators that can be used to evaluate the overall quality of single case research. One example is the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, NTAC's Quality Indicator Checklist. Another example is the What Works Clearinghouse Pilot Standards. Ultimately, there's a broad agreement on standards for demonstrating methodological rigor in single case research. Let's take a closer look at the recommendations from these quality indicators that can help us ensure the validity of our work. Validity is framed as truth and allows us to evaluate whether we are actually measuring what we seek to measure or whether the observed value corresponds to the true value. In single case research, this requires that we generate a behavioral definition, articulate the dimensions of the behavior being measured, and specify the conditions under which data collection occurs. There are three relevant types of validity in single case research: internal validity, external validity, and social validity. In single case research, internal validity is referred to as reliability of effect. It's important that we establish whether the independent variable and the dependent variable and the independent variable only is responsible for the change in behavior. In other words, we want to assert that X caused Y. To make this claim, we need to document 1, that X precedes Y, 2, that X and Y covary, and 3, that there are no Z's which might explain the covariation between X and Y. This means that we need to control for threats to internal validity. The challenges are that it's impossible to control for every threat, and a possible threat may not be a threat. In the next 10 slides, we'll learn about 10 common threats to internal validity, also called threats to experimental control. These are threats because they weaken our ability to show that X caused Y, as variables other than X may account for findings. First, history refers to things that occur outside the study that are extra experimental that contribute to accidental learning or acquisition of the targeted behavior. This can include aspects that are part of a participant's characteristics, experience with a token economy or iPad. An example of a history threat would be a scenario where the classroom teacher gets sick and takes a 3-week medical leave during the data collection phase of the study. The researchers may be the ones implementing the intervention consistently, but the extra experimental occurrence might introduce a substitute whose lack of familiarity with routines and expectations is disruptive to the students, or who decides to use class time to offer more practice with the skills addressed through the intervention instead of following the plans or procedures left by the classroom teacher. Note that the term history does not refer to something that occurred in the past before data collection began. Maturation refers to changes in behavior that naturally occur due to the passage of time. Kids will naturally or developmentally change over 180 school days, so we can't necessarily say that a year-long intervention X is the sole factor that contributed to the change in Y. Testing, or the very act of repeatedly measuring behavior, has an effect that can threaten experimental control. For example, students can learn through testing, which is referred to as a practice effect or facilitative effect. In fact, this is the very reason that multiple attempts are allowed on quizzes in this class. However, there can be inhibitive effects where testing leads to feelings of boredom or frustration. Instrumentation threats refer to issues that arise from the measurement system. Human and technological errors, like observer bias or drift, poor behavioral definitions, for example. Fidelity or integrity are important in single-case research. Procedural infidelity occurs when procedures are not consistently implemented. Things might be added, like extra prompts, or things might be missing, like no reinforcements. Attrition refers to the loss of participants. This can threaten experimental control, especially if we have fewer than 4 participants to begin with, because it may jeopardize the chance to document 3 demonstrations of effect at 3 different points in time. Multiple treatment interference is a threat in cases where 2 or more interventions or treatments are evaluated. This can be sequential effects, where the order of the intervention influences the data, or carryover effects, where order is not an issue, but still a relation between adjacent conditions, like responding during one condition influences responding in another condition. Data instability is a threat to our prediction, verification, and replication. When data show high variability, we can't predict where the next data point will likely be if no changes are made. Cyclical variability refers to a specific type of data instability, repeated and predictable patterns in the data series over time. Participants responding to something other than the intervention. An example might be that a child's behavior changes consistently on Wednesday afternoons when their grandparent picks them up from school, opposed to the other afternoons when they take the bus to an after-school care program. Finally, we have the Hawthorne and halo threats. The halo effect is a period of time that doesn't represent reality. Maybe there's a new interventionist or a novel intervention or technology. The Hawthorne effect is also a case where the observed behavior doesn't represent natural behavior because of the participant's knowledge of the study. To control for threats of adaptation, we do history training. We've addressed the need for internal validity. 2 remaining types of validity are external validity and social validity. External validity refers to the generality of findings. Remember that in single-case research, we're usually more interested in how George responds to a treatment than we are in comparing George's responses with Paul's responses. But we do want to know if it's fair to expect that others like George would similarly respond to the treatment. That is, will the intervention work with others in other settings, with other investigators, with only minor variations to the procedures? The mechanism we have for enhancing the generality of findings is replication. We replicate to reduce the margin of error and to increase the confidence in results. Social validity is the way that we assess whether and for whom our study carries social significance. According to Montwolf, there are 3 dimensions or levels or facets to assess. Number 1 are the goals socially important. That is the dependent variable acceptable and useful? To whom? Number 2 are the procedures, the independent variable, socially acceptable. And 3 are the results and effects robust and visible? Do they offer social significance? For whom? In brief, we as researchers take steps to measure and document the social acceptability of the goals, procedures, and outcomes of our interventions. Reflect on your understanding of the 4 objectives in this presentation. 1, explain historical theories that influence single-case research. 2, describe the components of applied research. 4, identify the 4 elements of a single-case research question. And 4, discuss the quality indicators of single-subject research. Savor the beauty of single-case design. Until we meet again.